Yes, I will tell you that I am just that nerdy. I really do version all of my recipes. You have to. It is useful for everything in the universe. So, as Rachel said, doctor, lawyer, physicist, poker player. These are all engineers that I actually know. So this isn't a bit of humor. We see this all the time. This is pretty standard. Wanted CS degree or equivalent. The thing is, we need more engineers, and we need them every day. And we talk a lot about this idea of the engineer shortage as if it's something uncontrollable. It's just how our industry is. But the problem is not what we think it is. Hiring only computer scientists is missing some really exceptional opportunities. It's kind of weird because if you don't have a CS degree, how do you know if you have the equivalent? Do we even all have the same definition? I tried searching for, what are the standard curricula for a CS program, and they didn't have much agreement among themselves. So I have a feeling that as recruiters, we're probably also going to be really undecided about what we mean by that. A big problem is who gets filtered out of that. If you think you have to be equivalent, that's a pretty high standard. Do you have 4 years of just learning your butt off? I don't know. It's hard because if you don't have a sense of truly what's being expected, it's really easy to just say, that's not me, and never even apply in the first place. And that's one of the ways we really lose people. And the bigger question, the one I want to address, is, does it even get us what we need? Do we need everyone on the team to be a computer scientist? Is that actually healthy for the team? If you're in Ruby, you know that Jim Weirich recently passed away. He was pretty beloved. He was kind of known as our teacher-in-chief, and ironically as CS teacher, because he himself did not have a CS degree. He was the creator of Rake, which is the most popular gem. He also co-created Ruby Gems itself and has had the most downloads from Ruby Gems of anything. And like I said, he didn't have a computer scientific background. So if people were doing this back when he got started, would he have ever gotten started? Who would have taken the risk of hiring him in the first place? What would we have lost? Instead, we had somebody who contributed for decades to making the rest of us much better. And I really love this bit of sense of humor here. He recently had, I think it was in Mavericks, as recently as that, Apple started including Rake by default. So he enjoyed going to Apple stores and just getting to see it's still there on all the boxes. There are so many other people that we admire tremendously that also don't have CS degrees. Uncle Bob Martin, John Blisides, one of the Gang of Four, Jan Lenhart, the creator of CouchDB, Jacob Kaplan-Moss, the creator of Django. All of them have no sense of even what the equivalent is. And it was interesting, I had a discussion the other day with Jan and Jacob, and they both described themselves as, without modesty, very average programmers. They've created something exceptional and lasting and that we all use every day, and yet they don't consider themselves very good programmers at all. And they don't have a sense of what's a baseline to compare yourself to. Would we call themselves exceptional? Would we call them average? I don't know. But if they were applying for jobs today, what if they were starting out? Would they want to? Would they feel qualified to? Then we do this other fun thing, wanted rock star. That's a rock star. We want him. That's a rock star. That's probably the one we mean, though, right? Yeah, I don't want these people on my team. I definitely don't want them touching code. And you hear it all the time, like, oh, like we joke, right? But no one actually does that. Come on, whoever says that. All the time. Ninjas, rock stars, gurus. I don't even know how a guru applies here, but for some reason that's another popular one. So instead of recruiting a rock star, what if we recruited some other kind of musician, someone who is less self-destructive and less in need of everyone's adulation? Here we have someone who has a degree in music, and I'd like to quote some of the things that they had to say. I spent a lot of coursework on linguistics, too. The applicability of the study of language and how humans use it is straightforward. I work with a bunch of languages and a bunch of humans with particular ways of using it. As a person who will always struggle with perfectionism, I was very lucky that my first programming job was at a shop that lived and breathed extreme programming. I learned first how to stop getting carried away with my own designs, then how to start being disciplined about what was really needed. And doesn't that sound a lot like what we do in coding as well? That's someone who has been a team lead for 15 years. This person is a former technical director for a 100-year-old opera house that had 60 to 90 shows come through every year, all of hers. Then a while ago, she says, I was convinced that I was going to be a chef instead. I went as far as going to cooking school. All of my careers organized teams of people. They have esprit de corps and an egalitarian blue-collar fairness about them, and all within a staggeringly high-pressure environment where you have to deliver something on time, no matter what. It may be a plate that has to go out to a diner, or it may be a curtain that has to go up at 8 p.m. sharp. Whatever it is, that's the job. There's lots of organizing of people, schedules, resources. Senior software dev, 18 years. Call center operations. I'm not sure whether that translates very well, but you know that person that you call at the help desk, and it's inevitably someone who has a horrible script that they have to read from, and you know that they'd rather die than read it again, but it's just what they're required to do by their horrible, horrible employer. So that's what this job is. I think it's interesting that they also have a degree in psychology, because that sounds like a really good complement to that job. So retail call centers can be very toxic environments. They're more about damage control and keeping customers in line than really helping people. I have broader perspective now on product and software impact, such as direct contact with customers, vendors, internal IT, executives. We often forget that understanding how to use a particular programming language is just an implementation detail. Once you have a grasp of the basics of a language and the community's best practices, then actual coding is often the least important part of making a project successful. I think we all really have a sense that, yeah, coding is analytical, right? There's a lot of different fields in which you get those same skills and really can bring something to the table. Oceanographer says, I apply scientific approach all the time, collecting data, comparing data to existing models, creating entirely new models, finding situations where existing models became insufficient. 12 years. A biochemist, this starts to get less and less sounding like programming, right? PhD in computational biochemistry. It turns out that computational biochemistry is the exploration of chemistry by using computer simulations. So actually inherent to this job is indeed using computers and programming quite a bit, but not in the way that probably most of the people in the room do. When I find a difficult bug, I apply the scientific method in debugging it. This approach has helped me resolve issues that other developers had thought were too hard or were beyond them or needed to just be ignored or worked around. It's also helped me make real improvements to the performance of a number of projects that I've been involved with. You probably noticed who the person is. He spoke earlier. Molecular biology, and again, computational biochemistry. I developed an expertise in regular expressions from scripting interchange of formats in Perl for computational biology. You learn analytical thought and the ability to define and solve problems. It's all very important. Also how to quickly assimilate massive amounts of information and make sense of it. These are all skills that we use constantly. I think this one kind of gets underestimated when we're hiring, that we want someone with a work ethics. And it's sort of antithetical to that idea of let's hire a rock star. Rock stars really don't have a work ethic. They have an admire me ethic. Police officer, 18 years, degree in Japanese, which is very handy because this person works with Ruby. Being a police officer is serving the community in a variety of roles that required hard work of me, dedication, maturity to accomplish, following through with work from start to finish, from arrests and investigations to court testimony. Both of those careers have required a lot of organization, maturity, management, problem solving, working under stress, deadlines, critical thinking, and learning to accomplish a task with what you have on hand. That's it. Notice brand new to the field. How many people do pair programming? Oh, I like this vote. I come from San Francisco where it's practically mandatory. There's a whole cult kind of built up around it. So there's a real sense of collaboration. This is something I wouldn't expect is a highly applicable skill to programming. But learning weaving at a deep technical level was so satisfying to me. I think my design education has been incredibly useful to me in my tech work. Thinking deeply about problems that need to be solved, the goals of what you're trying to create, and the end users, thinking about what you are making and how that will affect them. All of these are skills that I use as a developer. It also provided a lot of practice communicating abstract ideas to other people and defending my opinion, which is basically the critique format of fine arts schools at all. Being able to do code review, being able to handle it. I like that person. Physical chemistry. It takes a ridiculous amount of persistence and commitment to that goal of earning a PhD. As a developer, I apply that scientific method of hypothesis, data collection, conclusions to every problem I am attempting to solve. The analytical mind transfers to development so well. When I don't know how to fix things as a scientist, I research in all the places that I can find until I find the information I need. As a developer, I employ similar tactics when troubleshooting an error, learning a new technique. I often had to give presentations about my scientific research, so I've become less afraid to tell other developers about things that I've learned or to propose talks for developer conferences. I think this one is particularly interesting because Blythe not only had a PhD, but she was spending years actually being a professor. And to walk away from all that, I think, is someone you really want to hire, someone who's so committed to leaving that much work and that much professional cred behind in order to start completely from scratch as an intern. Coding. I like this idea of archaeologists, and I want to find an actual archaeologist to talk to. But we dig around and code all the time, dusty, musty old code, and trying to figure out what the hell it means, and hoping somewhere there's a civilization that can provide context for it. Unconventional backgrounds really breed great developers. It's homogeneity that boxes us in. Diverse teams are more profitable, they're more successful, productive, they're more excited about what they're doing. Diversity has a lot more to do with just demographics. We tend to think of diversity as we need to have a woman, we need to have some sort of racial minority. Great, we're done. We got diversity. But it's not just demographics, it's about benefiting from distinctly varied perspectives. This is not diversity. One voice is not diversity. It's one person who's disrupting a really nice, comfortable rut that we've gotten into and that we call culture fit. Groupthink is the art of everyone just going along with what you think everyone else wants. And so you never actually express your own opinion because it shouldn't matter. The culture has already decided what's best. Groupthink needs to be disrupted. We have to break out of it. Healthy teams cultivate diversity because disruption and discomfort is the point. This is what diversity looks like. It's much messier, and it varies on far more than one axis. There's nothing here where you can just say, like, oh, that's the one. We've added the one. So why do we want diversity at all? Why is this important? I think there's a tendency to think of it as that rubber stamp. You know, someone told us that we need diversity, so let's tack that on. Here's a lawyer who was in practice for 7 years. Law and programming both involve organizing data, and most importantly, it's been incredibly helpful as a programmer to have had that decade of training and his experience as an attorney. It gave me evaluation of evidence and relevance. Debugging, just like parsing a legal argument, is all about gathering and learning from evidence. Culture fit. The reason we like culture fit is because what we're really saying is no one has to change. When someone else enters, we're very confident that nothing will change. And that means we don't have to deal with conflict. And that feels really nice to know that, you know, we're not going to fight. We're not going to wonder and be uneasy about, what are you doing here? Why are you coming up with this? We need to be able to have those discussions. We need to have people in the room who come at things from a completely different direction and challenge and push and ask, why are we doing it this way? In a completely naive sense, it's sometimes the best way to ask a question with absolutely no knowledge of why the answer originally was done this way, and be able to look at an idea completely fresh. That's where discomfort for us is getting a better product in the end for the users. We're always trying to put concepts into practice, but sometimes it's those newbies who are the best able to do that. He says, what people who have used computer science but not studied it formally bring to the table is experience putting concepts into practice. We should want diversity because it's profitable. It increases sales, it increases revenue, it increases profitability. This has been studied for decades. There's money to be had in having people in the room who challenge us, period. There's been some really interesting research. If you divide up teams with one having an expert and one having just, you know, ordinary mortals on it, and give them a task, they'll come away and they'll both do their thing and come back. And the team that had the expert comes back with actually the poorer, less creative, less innovative, had a hard time problem-solving result. Whereas the team that had nothing but average people did a better job because they didn't have an expert to defer to. They didn't have the one right answer. They actually had to think through the problem and solve it together. Now, where it gets really interesting is both of those groups think wrongly about their process. The group with the expert is really proud of themselves, and they figured they did a great job. They were really productive, really creative, really came up with just the best answer. And it's those people who are just the average developers who come back and feel really disappointed in themselves because clearly having the expert was going to, you know, make an automatic win. So on the one hand, we have this problem of limiting our ability to have a productive team by putting a rock star on it, but also how that affects the dynamic in the room. If there are people who are working on different projects and they believe that one project is always going to be favored because it's got the golden boy, then everyone is having resentment or confusion or really having this sense of, what am I doing here? You know, if I'm on the team that's never actually going to accomplish anything, or, you know, what we build isn't actually going to be used, why do I need to put in the effort? I might as well just, you know, wait till the end of the day. Rock stars, they suppress as much as groupthink any sort of real discussion. Anytime you're deferring to the one person in the room who you're sure is expert, you never get to hear any other opinion, any other viewpoint, have anything challenged at all. That means that there's a whole lot of ideas that get squelched. Deliberately, personally, voluntarily. It's not like someone, you know, a rock star is saying like, you do not talk, although it's a rock star, so that could happen. But it really has much more to do with people's own self-censorship, not wanting to look like a fool. And so you end up with a room full of people who look like they've agreed, and they haven't, but they haven't spoken up about that disagreement. When you take that rock star off the team or never added in the first place, you get that variance, that those differences actually aired, and they have to be evaluated and compared because there's no one that's obviously the right answer. They have to actually think it through. So we've got this paradox that I talked about earlier of actual effectiveness versus belief in how effective you were. And the fact that it's reversed means it's really hard to self-evaluate our own performance. But externally, someone should, because the teams that we think are not productive may very well be the ones that are most useful to the project. Yes, there is value in optimizing a tree search, says Joshua. Algorithms, we can optimize them to death, but most often it is valuable to know whether or not you even want to use a tree search algorithm in a given situation. I leave it to the reader to figure out which skill set is more important for a business trying to get off the ground, building a technology-based product or service. Leon Gersing is pretty well known in the Ruby community. He's also known as Ruby Buddha. He has a great deal of philosophy to share with the world. And I'll read you some. To be accepting of others, you must accept yourself as someone that is not complete due to lack of exposure. To find ourselves, we must be willing to seek out that which we don't understand, that which we fear, and we need to embrace it. Only then can we know where we stand in contrast to it. Therein our differences become the glue that bind us together. Art, history, philosophy, these are my favorite tools when solving problems. And I think the part he forgets to mention is he's very charismatic on stage. He obviously picked up a little something in his years. Oops, go back. So we need to crave that disruption. Hey, repeat it early. We need to hire for radically crazy and plausibly different people. People whose background we would never seek out is exactly who we should seek out. And we should make sure our recruiters are too, that they're taking away those filters that say, don't even knock on the door, don't even submit your CV, because you're probably not at all what we're looking for, and you don't have the right degrees, you don't have the right background, you don't have the right perspective. The fact that they don't is what makes them perfect. We want them in the room. Thank you.
Questions? Hi. So how would you convince a software company you're applying for, if you don't have a degree that they're looking for? How do you convince them that you are the one that they're looking for?
I'm going to give a couple of answers to that. One, if they really have a hard time being persuaded, it's possible that they're not the right company to work with, because if they need to be persuaded to even entertain an interview with you, then they may also have a really hard time integrating you into the company and may not really see your value. That said, I really think there's a lot of value in doing project interviews or pairing interviews rather than talking about what have you done in the past or what kind of education do you have, to say, let's sit down and work on a small project for a couple of hours, half a day, have you come in, do it at home, whatever it is that the company wants to do, but demonstrate actual skills rather than demonstrate something that really is only on a piece of paper. And that's testing for everyone a lot better how this person would do at the actual work that we do on the job every day. Did that answer all of it? Because I can come up with several more answers if you need. Okay. Actually, I'll add something to that answer. Be careful of companies that want you to do that all day on a project that they've already built. That's exploiting the labor force. All right, who else do we have here? I thought, okay.
How would you help a team of, let's say, classical developers to adapt and step out of their comfort zone and include people with such profiles into the interdisciplinary development team? Yeah.
I think Joshua really raised a good point about do that early at the startup phase. Culture it really cements in a company around as few as 6 people. So you really have to start early stage with the idea of this is how we are. This is what we do. This is how we're always going to hire. We're going to be able to tolerate the uncomfortableness of that. And that's hard for a startup. I mean, it's really hard because you've got all sorts of other things that are challenging, and it's really tempting to take out that one. It's something that you can take off. But, in the long run, if the point is to be profitable and big, and usually for a startup it is, right, then this is a necessary part of that process. For large companies, it is so much harder. There's an interesting trade-off, though, when you get to a company that's enormous, because then they have this HR department, and they have, at least in America, I assume elsewhere, HR laws that are telling them you need to foster diversity. They may have felt some lawsuits, or they have internal groups saying, we need more people who are like us. Right now we're a minority in this company, and we need to be seeking out more. So you get various initiatives when the company is really large, and you have an opportunity when they're really small. The hard part is when they're that whatever medium size would be, maybe up to a couple hundred people, which doesn't sound medium to me, but others say. I think you have to have support from above. You have to do that sales pitch and come with the research. There's tons out there, and I'd be happy to share some with you. But this is stuff that's for decades. It's been researched. There is no doubt that this is more productive. It's just more a matter of how do you convince someone of something they believe isn't true, and that's the battle. And I can't really give you an answer to that one. I think it really becomes a sales pitch, and someone that you have to trust will entertain that. I mean, that goes back to his question of if you have to work really hard to convince the company to do something that's profitable and in the long run really healthy for the organization, then you probably should be rethinking talking to them at all. Yes.
How do you think so? Here.
Oh, thank you.
So in a startup or small organization where you don't get a large amount of incoming CVs necessarily, but we'll be looking for people. How do you, because it's really hard to find those people because they are not at the typical places, or they're really hard to find. How would you go about that, finding these people in a smaller setting?
You raise a really good point, which is for a tremendous number of companies, we're essentially hiring entirely based on network. So someone who's working there or someone who's a colleague is saying, I have a friend who'd be great for this. So we don't really get that chance to recruit externally for people who should hear. And I think that is going back to your question about how do you build that? There have to be decisions about when we recruit. We will consider people who come with a personal recommendation, but our process is that we also open things up to external recruiting, and that we're going to go out to other people and say, please tell us where we can find someone. There is, I apologize because my knowledge is really limited to the US, but in the past 2 years there's been a ton of boot camps that have sprung up, which are intended to be sort of a very quick substitute for a certain amount of CS training. So they range from 6 weeks to 12 weeks, in which people who are oftentimes already working in some sort of unrelated field and really want to make a quick jump into engineering take these very intensive 80-hour for several weeks and do this immersion stuff and come out. And there are, at this point, so many boot camps, I think it's well over 100, that they've actually reached a saturation point where it's hard for them to find jobs for all those graduates. But it also means it's an opportunity because there are all those people who are newly minted who actually have been given a really good foundation. They're not ready in any way to be, certainly not seniors, and some of them are ready to be juniors, some of them aren't. But it means you can, for instance, have a fantastic intern that you can train to fit so well into how you guys develop. I mean, that can be really great. And even though I just spoke against exploitation, interns cost less. I think I might have forgotten some of your questions, so repeat it for me.
So specifically, as a startup or small team where you hire from the network, but even when you're looking for those people, I mean, boot camps are one chance, but where, I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes at meetups somebody may come there
Yeah.
that might be interested, but that's like very, very few people.
Yeah.
So when you're at the point where you get like a bigger company who gets a lot of CVs and lots of different people coming in, but as a small team, that's just, it's network, or you're going out and talking to people. And then it's really hard to find an archaeologist who is now in archaeology and has done some coding on the side.
Don't forget, all these are real people.
No, that's totally fine. But as a small team, like
Yeah.
if they apply to you, that's relatively easy to pick them then. But if you want to find that person, there's a very limited set of resources that you can go into.
Some of it you actually, I mean, make sure that you're doing a job posting. It's amazing how many companies are never externally announcing that there's an opening at all. Or another thing we do is we don't have any openings, but we hire people who, we just think are great. And so you get where there never was a job open in the first place. It was just someone from the network or someone who was admired enough that someone just said, green light, we want to have this person in the company. We'll figure out later what their job is. So that is a real barrier. So make sure that you are actually putting word out to public sources. I've seen a tremendous number of companies hire and hire and hire without having put anything on their careers page at all. A friend had, they were having problems getting resumes in general, and they were particularly bothered by the fact that they weren't getting any women applying. And she said, well, let me take a look at this job posting. And she just started crossing things out, including CS, just framing it differently, really. And she said overnight they started getting 20% of the resumes were suddenly from women, and they'd had none, just by changing the phrasing to really open up the idea of this is what we're looking for. Some of the best postings I've seen aren't so much talking about what tools do you know, because tools can be taught. Your life experience is so much harder to be taught and takes way more time. So having more phrasing that's talking about what kind of perspective we're interested in and being open to all the different ways that perspective could come. That may have been something you got through education. It may have been something that you got through self-education. It may be something that was endowed to you by life itself. But being able to identify more what kind of mind do we want in this company, and then being really clear when we put it out there that this is what we're hiring for, is mind, and if necessary, we are more than happy to train you on our toolkit. That's easier to do. Now, did that answer more of the question? All right, good.
Hi, I'm over here.
Thank you.
Hi.
There's an incredibly bright light that's blocking my view of everybody.
I don't really have a question. I just want to add something. I'm in higher education here in Austria, and I think turning archaeologists into web developers isn't all that easy, and what we really need is more offers, like the boot camps you mentioned. I don't know of any boot camps we have here locally. Maybe somebody would like to start some. I think they're quite
very
American.
profitable.
They're quite American in being quite expensive in the beginning. I think we should. What we can offer now is, in Austria, we've only switched over to the bachelor and master system about 10 years ago. So we used to have 5 years of study and you get a master's degree. And now we have 3 years of study. Then you can switch over to something else and do your master's in something different. And I think this is an opportunity for people to change the path of their career that hasn't really been realized by people here. Yeah. So you can, after doing your bachelor's in archaeology and or after doing your bachelor's as a lawyer, you can decide to switch tracks and get a master's in web development with me in Salzburg. Just saying.
That's really interesting to me because in America, I have the freedom to change my major every single semester. So it's interesting to hear that you can't do that as easily. I've changed careers many times. I'm not sure what number I could put on that. And that's certainly true of a lot of people that I spoke to as well. The fact that would be really challenging and is just starting to be made easier is really an interesting discussion to have. And I would love to talk to you later about it. Career change. A lot of these people, I mean, kind of by definition, what we're describing had to be career changers. So how do you find those people? in some respects, if we start to go back to identifying what kind of mind do we want, then we can identify some place where those minds hang out. And, do things like say, I would like to give a presentation about such and such. Would you folks be interested in that? Another thing that is very effective is to make individual invites. And this is something that works in many contexts. If you want someone to volunteer, ask them person to person. You get a much higher result. If you want someone to propose to a conference, ask them personally to propose. You get much higher numbers. And if you want someone to apply for a job, you can identify them and just say, hey, I think, you would be a great choice in our company. Think about applying. I would be happy to, add my recommendation to it. Those kinds of things, put it on the individual. So, there's that question of why should individuals be taking on kind of the company's responsibility? But that's one of the ways we can be part of that cultural change, which, your question again. We can be an internal advocate, or we can also externally be doing some of that work ourselves. Actually, that doesn't have to be an or, that can be an and.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. So.
Are we out?
So 0 questions.
Thank you, Carina.